Ready? Do we have a quorum? We do have a quorum, right? We do. Okay. I'll go ahead and get us started. And it looks like we only have one speaker. So good evening. Welcome to the County of Santa Clara Agricultural Preservation Task Force, which is affiliated with the Housing, Land Use, Environment, Transportation Committee of the Board of Supervisors. And today is November 27th, 2018. It's a little past 5:30 p.m., so we're free to get started and call this meeting to order. I'm Dave Cortese, one of the co-chairs of this task force. I'm here with Supervisor Mike Wasserman, the other co-chair, both members of the Board of Supervisors, for the record. And I'm going to ask that people self-introduce quickly, just from right to left, starting at the end of the dais.
Here?
Yeah, we're just name is fine.
Aaron Gill?
Julie Hutchison.
Kevin O'Day.
Alex Kennett.
Bill Kella.
Jeff Smith.
Laurel Pervetti.
Elizabeth Pianca, Office of the County Council.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we've called the meeting to order. We've established that we have a quorum, and I think everyone up here in the dais has been introduced. We will now move to public comment. We have one request to speak under public comment from Swanee Edwards. Please come on up. Based on our rules and policies, we'll just set the timer for 3 minutes. So you have up to 3 minutes to speak, Swanee. Thank you.
Hello, committee members. My name is Swanee Edwards. I live in Morgan Hill and have been just semi-involved in a lot of the land use issues and things, but recently have been a bit involved with touring Sargent Ranch, taking an open space. Be happy to provide this notice to our secretary here. So.
Peggy Doyle from the clerk's office can grab that from you and make sure it gets distributed.
Other than that, I'd just also like to take an opportunity to thank you guys all for your work. I think what we're doing here is important, it's timely, and happy holidays. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your efforts. That's all for item 2. Item 3 is stakeholder comment. Is there anyone that wishes to speak under stakeholder comment? Those individuals or organizations would be outlined on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll move to item 4, which is approval of the consent calendar and changes to the task force agenda. There's one consent item moved by Supervisor Wasserman.
Second.
Second by Laurel Pervetti. Any comment on consent? All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions. Item 4 passes unanimously. Item 5, this is where we get to turn it over to our team, our staff here from Department of Planning and Development. And this is, well, I'm just going to turn over to you and let you introduce the item. I know this has to do with funding and so forth for the ACE program.
Hi, good evening. Rob Eastwood, County Planning Manager. So this is actually a bit of a report back. So the task force will remember back in May and June, it considered what we considered sort of the central major program of this effort, which is the creation of an agricultural conservation easement purchasing program. The task force might remember discussions on possible funding and structure of that program. And in discussing it, actually assembled and created a subcommittee. And over the last few months, between June and tonight, the subcommittee met a few times, and I'm mostly here just to report out what the subcommittee discussed, its recommendations, and to lead the rest of the task force through those, and hopefully the task force would concur with those and recommend those onto the board. The purpose of the subcommittee was to look at 3 things. One was to take a very hard look at funding for a long-term ag conservation easement purchasing program. What we found is the programs that work have long-term sustained dedicated funding, and that includes programs in Long Island, Marin, Sonoma, where there are tax dollars that are allocated specifically for conservation easement purchasing. And the task force will remember back in June, we looked at a variety of tax options, and I think the mandate was to take a real hard look at what would be the most viable with a likelihood that the county and stakeholders could pursue a tax option on the 2020 ballot. That was objective 1. And then objective 2 was what could the county do now? Is there a way ahead of sustained funding to start a program from an administrative standpoint, interim funding standpoint, any other measure to just get the program going. And the task force discussed that, had a few recommendations. One of the meetings was a discussion with the Farm Bureau. They had some good feedback. And again, tonight here to report that out. So I'll go ahead and sort of cut to the chase. I'm going to make the presentation pretty short. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm just going to go ahead and articulate what's in your staff report. But of course, at the end, if I'm missing things, absolutely look to subcommittee members that were part of that to chime in. So the first recommendation for a long-term sustained funding source was to pursue a real estate transfer tax. And for folks in the audience or on the task force, what that is a tax that's paid when real estate is transferred between parties. You'll remember the Long Island program was funded or continues to be funded by real estate transfer tax. That's $4 per thousand, I believe, the Long Island example. Currently, in the County of Santa Clara, what we collect is $1.10 per $1,000 in property value. Currently in state legislation, that is capped at $1.10 per $1,000 in property value, so we are currently at our cap. What the subcommittee discussed was looking at a legislative solution at the state level that would increase that amount, that would give the county the right to go to voters and ask to increase the transfer tax. Anecdotally, we looked at a recent November ballot. There's actually been a lot of success from some cities, charter cities, a bit different from us, in going to the voters with transfer tax increases in Berkeley, Union City, I think a few others, Hayward, Oakland, all went to their voters, asked to increase their transfer tax, sometimes by ample amounts for general taxing purposes, and all of those initiatives actually were successful. So in terms of polling and voting, evidence of voters supporting this, we've seen some evidence in the ballots. But the first measure would be to go to the state, ask what we think is a small change in state legislation. It would be the California Tax and Revenue Code to allow counties to increase from $1.10 at minimum up to, I believe it's $1.65 is what we're looking at. In the tax code today, cities can go up to, I think, 55 cents in addition to the counties, and this was looked at as sort of a parity measure to allow counties to increase that tax higher. So that would be the first recommendation that's before the task force. Would you support that recommendation to the board to seek those legislative changes? The county lobbyists in Sacramento would work and try and find a sponsoring member, and that would be the first action. That was action number one. Action number two and three are looking at short-term strategies, and I'll go ahead and summarize. The first was looking at a way to administratively start the ACE program as soon as possible. And I think the subcommittee in talking to the Farm Bureau, looking at the Long Island examples, other programs, recommended the creation of a standing Ag Advisory Commission that could continue to advise, act as a body that would help create the ACE program. In the Long Island example, there's a standing farmland advisory committee comprised of the county, towns, members of the ag community. They review agricultural conservation easement projects that come forward. They recommend those to the County of Suffolk legislative body. And a thought of the task force was to create a similar commission. We're calling it the Ag Advisory Commission. The county has many commissions today. This would be a new commission. Would do a couple things. One is it could continue the effort we've started on, and we have state funding for, to create criteria, regional criteria to purchase ag conservation easements. It could advise the administration and board on adopting those criteria. Once those criteria are adopted, when we get actual projects coming in, it could act in an advisory capacity to advise the board on which projects to fund. And it could act as a standing body once this body dissolves after tonight, to advise the administration of the board on other ag plan implementation items, such as the Ag Ombuds program or others that are still ongoing. So number one was to recommend that the Board of Supervisors create this Agricultural Advisory Commission, which would be a standing body. One question in creating that commission would be, how would it be populated? Who would be appointed to it? Typically with commissions in the county, each of the supervisorial districts appoints one member. In this instance, all of the activities would focus on agriculture, which are mostly centered in South County. One thought could be a balance of having each supervisorial member nominate one member, but in addition to that, having a few members that are allocated based on stakeholders in the farmland community. We did talk with our Ag Commissioner, Joe Davini. Some sectors to consider could be those like viticulture, orchard crops, small and large-scale row crops, and also perhaps grazing. So a consideration on how that committee is, or commission is comprised, could be a balance of appointed members from the stakeholder farmland community and also appointed members from each district. Finally, recommendation number 3 was how to fund a short-term program. And again, the focus was on a transfer tax for long-term sustained funding with a target of a 2020 ballot initiative. Is there a way to get seed money, I'd say, or venture capital or initial investment money to try and stand up the program now between 2020 to show it works, have some key acquisitions, show voters the success of this program, and it could help convince the voters of this county to fund a long-term program. So the task force referenced back to a resolution that was put before the Board of Supervisors on June 19th of this year. It was a year-end fund balance. The idea behind the year-end fund balance is at the end of the year, if there are revenues left over after all the department budgets are settled, that the high priority would be funding an ag conservation easement purchasing program. And the resolution that was before the board back in June discussed $20 million per year. Again, the best characterization I heard of this resolution, it's a priority document that tells the county executive and the board that this is a priority funding program that should be funded if there are dollars available at the end of each budget cycle. On June, the board had recommended some modifications to that to clarify the funding available for the year-end fund balance and that the resolution come back. And again, I think the recommendation of the subcommittee and hopefully through the task force would be that resolution come forward as adopted, and then ideally with funds available, there will be funds available at the end of this year to start for next year, fiscal year, to fund the agricultural conservation easement purchasing program. So with that, I'll go ahead and summarize. Again, the 3 recommendations were pursuit of the real estate transfer tax, number 1, creation of the Agricultural Advisory Commission, number 2, and 3 would be adoption of a resolution creating a year-end fund balance, number 3. I know it's a bit short and sweet, so I don't have graphics or other PowerPoints to support this, but I hope there are supporting documents in your packet that describe this. And again, if some of the subcommittee members wanted to jump in, make sure we're clarifying and touching on a few points I didn't touch on, I'd feel free to. Otherwise, I'm available for questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rob. I don't know if there are questions or comments from members of the task force. Laurel?
Thank you. I just want to commend staff for supporting the subcommittee and for your excellent job in summarizing the recommendations that did come forward. At the appropriate time, I'm prepared to make a motion.
I think it's the appropriate time.
Okay, I move the 3 recommendations.
I'm sorry, Laurel, I apologize. May I ask a few questions?
Yeah,
before
we'll take some more
Okay.
on them.
All right, just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
That's fine.
So for discussion purposes, I move the 3 recommendations pursuing the transfer tax, creating the Agriculture Advisory Commission with stakeholders not only from the agricultural community, but others interested in agriculture preservation. So the blended model is suggested by staff, and then recommending the short-term funding from the excess fund balance. Thank you.
And if there's a second, we can continue with
I'll second
discussion.
that. Aaron Gill.
Was there a second? Oh, thank you, Aaron. So motion by Pravetti, second by Aaron, and we're going to come back now to other questions and comments on the motion or to the panel. It's a kind of a Board of Supervisors thing. It's a little, if you've been at cities, oftentimes there just won't be a motion until everyone's exhausted all the comments and questions. And so I want to acknowledge that you probably would have interjected at exactly the right moment in 19 out of 20 jurisdictions. We just always get the motion out there, it seems like, and then if we need to modify it based on input, we do that usually.
Well, I think that speaks about how long I've been in front of the Board of Supervisors that I couldn't remember that. Okay, thank you. So just a couple of questions. With regards to timeline, we want to go to the ballot in 2020. We are looking at a preference of a transfer tax versus the trust. When you come before the Board of Supervisors, when this is discussed, is there something you're suggesting as a tipping point to switch from one to the other? We know how critical this funding is, that we need to get something on the ballot, that we need this funding. What at staff at this point in time are you thinking? Because you've got to go to the legislature, so not such a cut and dry affair.
Sure, it's not slow, or it's a very quick burn, and one thought is for 2020, some have had more success on the primary versus the November ballot, and I believe the California primary has actually moved up to March. Right, so that is actually a very quick burn. I think our priority is the enabling state legislative change is needed first. So without that, the transfer tax option is not an option. So our recommendation is to pursue that. We don't know, none of us, not me, work or live in Sacramento in the politics. We don't know the unknowns of what will happen once that starts. I know typically the real estate industry is not favorable to this, and we anticipate that, but once we start the process of trying to find a sponsor and moving it forward, what happens then, I guess we'll see. But I say the enabling part at the state is critical regardless. Option two, as you articulated, Ms. Hutchinson, was the trust fund. To my knowledge, no state legislative change is needed for that. So I think pursuing the state legislative change allows at least the transfer tax option. If for some reason that doesn't work, I think we'd come back to the board at some point and say, hey, we still have a need here to fund ag conservation easement purchasing programs. Option one did not work. Would the board be interested in looking at option two? I do know, generally my thoughts are on option two with voters. It's a less of a hard sell. There's no new tax mechanism as the Park Charter Fund works. It's my characterization. It's a siphon. A certain portion of revenues are dedicated only to Park Charter Fund. I do know within the county and board members that can be a hard sell because it's non-discretionary funding. But again, if the first option doesn't work, we'd intend to come back to the board and see if they'd be willing to support option two.
All right, thank you. And by the way, I apologize. I didn't thank the ad hoc committee for their work. Thank you very much, folks. I know that these were not easy conversations to probably have. Then the other option for the short term, when do you expect to bring this option back or this resolution back to the board?
Well, the request would come from the task force to the board. I know the request from the board, I believe in June, was to have the resolution come back. It was a date uncertain. I think we'd try and work with the administration and county council to facilitate the return of the resolution to the board. Ideally with, you'll see your last item on the agenda is the full Ag Task Force report out, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, how that goes to the board. But I think ideal from the department's perspective is the resolution is available at the same board meeting that those recommendations come forward, and we're targeting January for that.
And finally, I just wanted to, I guess, get input from the rest of the task force here of this letter from Trina Heineser from the San Martin Neighborhood Alliance in terms of the composition of the Agricultural Advisory Commission. Is there thoughts around this? Is this something that we would advise to move forward to the Board of Supervisors for consideration for the Ag Commission?
If I can interject, I think just making sure that the letter from San Martin Neighborhood Alliance is not only note and file, but included as part of the packet forwarded to the Board of Supervisors, so that my sense is that the board will have a thoughtful discussion about what the composition should look like, not disregarding the task force recommendations or subcommittee recommendations, but probably because the board itself is comprised somewhat geographically, to say the least. There's often those kind of discussions. There was for this task force, as some of you know. But I think the important thing is to forward it along so it gets equal time, if that makes sense. I don't know if others have something to say, please pipe in. Supervisor Warsman, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that that would certainly work and be included in here. And I think the recommendation in item number 2 talks about our Mr. Joe Davini, who's here this evening, our Ag Commissioner, creating, forming it, doing that. I think that all makes sense. What I did want to ask, and I'll ask the motion maker and the seconder through my co-chair, in the recommended action on page 1 of this item number 5, it lists possible actions A, B, C, and D. B refers to the transfer tax, which we're calling possible action number 1. C refers to the year-end fund balance, which we're calling possible action number 3. And D, the fourth possible action, is referring to the Ag Commission, which we're calling action number 2. So I just want to make it clear here this evening, we're not voting on B, C, and D as is stated on recommended action on page 1. Instead, we're being asked by staff possible actions 1, 2, and 3, which is the tax, the Ag Commission, and the fund balance. And what I'd like to ask through the motion maker and the seconder, if I may, if we could, instead of handle all 3 of these together as one, we handle them individually, because I'm a yay on one and nay on the other. I don't know if any others are split or not. But if this is the time that we're talking about all 3, then I'll make my comments about all 3. And we'll do that as one motion, or we handle them separately. And I'm tossing that out to the motion maker and the seconder.
I'm fine with splitting them if that facilitates discussion and
Okay.
better decisions.
Is that all right with the second?
That's okay with me. Split them off is fine as well.
Thank you. Then I'd like to take this opportunity. I'll make my comment on what we're calling action item number 1, which is the transfer tax, which is also item B on the front page. The concerns I have with the transfer tax is, one, being a tax on all real estate transactions, but even more importantly, it's a general tax. It is not a specific tax. We're not saying this will go towards the purchase of ag easements in perpetuity. What we're saying is this is a general tax, and Board of Supervisors, when this money comes your way, we would like you to use it to purchase ag easements. Whatever board is here, 3 out of 5 members can simply say, we'd like some more sheriffs. We'd like some more fix some more potholes. We'd like to whatever. So what concerns me, first of all, besides being a tax on every real estate transaction, I'll just admit to that concerning me, is number 2, it's a general tax which any board in the future can use for any purpose. So I just didn't want us to kid ourselves in saying we're voting to increase the real estate transfer tax so the money will be used for the purpose of buying ag easements. That may be the wish of the majority of supervisors today, but may not be the case in January. May not be the case 2 years or 4 years from now. I just want everybody to understand it was a general tax, not a specific. Personally, I'm generally opposed to general taxes because they aren't specific. And what one group today may be voting for may not be what the money is used for in the future. Number 2, in reading the staff's report on this tax, I did not see a sunset date. I just saw this as going on in perpetuity. I think the goal that we have is to find ways of funding the purchase of ag easements. And if that's deferring leftover year-end fund balances, if it's a transfer tax, if it's simply direction from the Board of Supervisors to the county exec that we'd like to see 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, whatever the number is, come out of the general fund each year and go that way. As long as 3 supervisors agree on that in any given year, that's what will happen. So anyway, I'll be voting against option number 1 because of those 3 concerns. Option number 2, the Ag Commission. I want to thank our task force that came back with this. I am very much in favor of creating an Ag Commission. And I think much as we do, and for those of you not familiar with the Board of Supervisors as much, we have a number, we probably have, I don't know, Dr. Smith, 100 committees? Certainly 50. 50 committees.
More like 230.
We have 230 committees. Wonderful. Okay. On those committees, such as the Women's 2020 Task Force and the Jail Monitoring Committee, we have very specific requirements of who is to serve on that committee to provide the most insight, to provide the most help, expertise, and advice to do that. On our Assessment Appeals Board, for instance, the person being appointed must be either MAI, a certified appraiser, or a certified real estate broker. So they have some sort of knowledge when they're hearing appeals about what's the appropriate amount to assess a piece of real estate. It can't just be a baseball card shop owner. Okay, I'm pointing to myself when I say this. It needs to have a certain expertise. In staff's recommendation on page 6 of 8, at the top, the recommendation from administration is that the County Ag Commissioner, which is Mr. Joe Davini, thank you for being here tonight, Joe, determine the most effective and appropriate representative sectors. I am certainly in favor of staff's recommendation as to how the makeup is, but I just wanted to explain to my fellow commissioners exactly what that meant. These properties, for the most part, these lands are in South County, and it's very important to me that the people making the decisions on that advisory commission know agriculture, know farming. And it's not just, who's in my district? Montecito. It's not just a software engineer in Montecito. And I'm just picking on my own district, so it's not to pick on anybody else's district. You need to have experts if they're going to be making decisions that are being forwarded to the Board of Supervisors, because the board values the opinions of those committees, like the Planning Commission. They value those opinions very, very strongly. So it's important to me that those opinions are educated, and I'm in favor of staff's recommendation. That's item number 2. Item number 3, year-end fund balance transfer. Supervisor Cortese and I were here earlier when direction was given, and the county exec, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Smith, the county exec said if there's dollars there, he understands that's direction from the board. I think tonight kind of memorializes or reaffirms prior Board of Supervisor direction to the board, to the county exec, and I'm in favor of item number 3 as well. So for the record, I'm opposed to 1, in favor of 2 and 3, whether you handle them as a group or individually. Thank you.
Can we let's just clarify, with the actual agenda.
Yeah.
Use the 5A, B, C, and D, and say that you're in favor, your vote would be in favor on the motion of 5A, C, and D, but not B. Is that correct?
Correct, but what's been proposed, the motion was to approve staff's recommendation 1, 2, and 3, which is the tax, the Ag Commission, and the year-end fund balance, but the agenda is set up as B, C, and D, which is the tax, the year-end fund balance, and the Ag Commission. It's reversed. So I would suggest to the motion makers, we either motion be using numbers 1, 2, and 3 as staff presented it, or B, C, and D as is in the agenda.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification, Supervisor.
We can just take them separately. I think what the motion was take them separately after it was modified.
Let's do it.
Right, because the first motion is off the table, and the second motion was to take each item individually. I was just suggesting that we use the printed, published agenda as we go through it, because people might be picking this up, following at home, or whatever. So why don't we take an individual vote then on each one, if that's the cleanest way to do it. We'll receive the report, which doesn't require a vote. That's 5A. 5B is the recommendation on the state legislative modifications on the real estate transfer tax. So is there further discussion on that item? All right. I just have one question. I just want to ask council, because I think it's an important distinction, if it is a distinction, and that is my understanding would be that if a transfer tax was put on the ballot and it was specified to be earmarked for ag preservation, then it would require a 2/3 majority, as opposed to the 50% plus 1 that you normally see with the general tax.
Elizabeth Pianka, Office of the County Council. That is correct. There are a lot of challenges with the transfer tax in terms of how it's been interpreted as currently an excise tax and not a property tax, and not and can continue as an excise tax if it's a general tax. So we're certainly able, for purposes of the board, to provide just kind of an off-agenda analysis of that distinction, because it's a thorny issue within both the statute and in the case law.
Great. Well, then maybe we can just attach that request for information. And to the extent that the task force members can be privy to the legal opinion, I don't know what the answer to that question is, but it'd be good to make sure that the task force members have the privileged information also of a legal opinion on
Certainly.
that. Okay, great. So the board and the task force members will have answers to the questions of, does it have to be a general tax or a specific tax? I just want to make sure we clear that up along the way. So on 5B, all in favor signify by aye. And we're going to pause for a minute before abstentions.
Yeah,
Dr. Smith?
I just make it clear I'm abstaining on all of these since they're directing the board, and it's not my job to direct the board.
Thank you. And Alex
Well, it's
has
just
a
your big chance here. And I'm not sure it's actually true, but we'll, in real life. All right, we have an extension from,
Supervisor Alex, I think, has a
Dr.
question
Smith?
before we call
Yeah,
the
my
vote.
Yes, Alex.
question is sort of twofold, having just finished a one-year term as the Board of Realtors chair of the Government Relations Group, and I can assure you they're going to be totally overwhelmed about even the suggestion of that. Anything having to do with a point of sale, they're going to be against, but, you know, they live with it. So I guess what I really wanted to hear, and I appreciate what Supervisor Wasserman has said, is the thinking on the committee and why they wanted it to have, why they thought this would be a good idea.
Well, I'll start. I think the committee looked at a variety of funding options, and this one appeared to be the most neutral approach. And as it indicated in the staff report, if the Board of Supervisors were interested, it could be pegged for higher value properties, so that way we would not be impacting our lower income residents here in the county, and that it would have a value for agriculture preservation. We recognize that the general tax has the challenges that the supervisor raised, but given some of the other choices, this one really rose to the top in terms of not creating other negative policy choices.
And I agree in the sense that the people that pay this tax are the people gaining from the sale, and really nobody else. You know, renters don't pay it. It's not a sales tax. It's not paid every day. It's paid maybe once in a lifetime, or however often you sell a property. So in that regard, it makes sense. Yet it contributes, it generates an enormous amount of money, despite that.
thank you. So where we're at on 5B is, let's just start over again and we'll just roll through it. All in favor signify by aye. In favor of the staff recommendation. Opposed?
Aye. Opposed? Nay.
We have one opposed, and we know we have an abstention from Dr. Smith. Any other abstentions? All right, then that passes with one no vote and one abstention. We'll move on to item 5C. This is asking us to forward a recommendation to the board to adopt a resolution to dedicate year-end fund balance to the Yates Conservation easements as memorialized in the June 19th, 2018 Board of Supervisors meeting that Supervisor Wasserman was referring to. So again, this is incorporated in the split motion, so we are open for any further discussion on the item. If not, I'm going to call.
Supervisor, what?
Yes.
Which are you handling? C?
5C on the agenda. This is the
Year-end fund balance.
fund balance. Okay, all in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That recommendation carries unanimously. And then the final recommendation was the creation of an Agricultural Advisory Commission and the forwarding of that recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. Let me just say, I believe there's probably some detail work that would need to be done prior to and during the board deliberation in terms of final composition, but I think the recommendation is to try to get something composed. So, Laurel?
Yes, and on this particular portion of the motion, I do want it to reflect that it should be a blended commission, so that way it would have the agricultural sectors represented, but also other key stakeholders as the supervisors may deem appropriate. And a clear one might be the Open Space Authority or other entities. So the blended model, as described in the staff report, is the specific motion. Thank you.
Okay, that was a motion, and that's agreed to by the seconder. Thank you. Any further discussion on this item before we call the question? All right, on 5D, all in favor signify by aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions. So that recommendation as characterized by the maker of the motion and the seconder goes forward on a unanimous vote. Right? Thank you all for that. Item 6, asking us to receive the report from the Department of Planning and Development relating to development of an agricultural park and small business incubator, including preliminary evaluation of location in county parks property. And this is an item we discussed a little bit in the past, and you're bringing it back here for us to review before we conclude this task force. So go ahead.
Stregan, Program Manager, Honor, just Michael Meehan. I did want to apologize for switching from the alphabet to the numbers. I know that on the last item, so apologize to Super Wasserman, but thanks for correcting that. And with that, I'll introduce Michael. This is a report back based on the direction we got from the task force on the incubator. It's a pretty short report, but we got some good updates on the progress of this program. Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening, Michael Meehan, Department of Planning. Let me just make this big. As Rob mentioned, we're bringing back this item just to give an update because we had given kind of a preliminary sketch in the September meeting, and this is an update on the work we've been doing thus far. So again, this is a proposal to create an agricultural park and small farm business incubator in pursuit of Objective 10 out of the Santa Clara Valley Ag Plan, specifically to support the growth of new farms and the creation of new farmers. At the September task force in which this initial concept was presented, the department was asked to look at county-owned lands and possibly working with county parks, as well as conducting a little bit more due diligence in the form of a preliminary business plan and feasibility study. And so in the past 2 months, that's what we've been up to. So to begin with county parks, it's still really early stages of discussion with them. However, we have had a productive ongoing conversation thus far. The planning department identified and assessed a number of potential sites throughout the South County that we thought met the basic criteria for evaluating a ag incubator site. And in the very first conversation we had with parks, we both came to the table with a similar idea for the use of the Harvey Bear, Coyote Lake Harvey Bear Ranch, I believe is the full title of the park, to explore that as a potential site. So the rest of this presentation and the report is a general view of what it would entail and what it would look like to develop an agricultural incubator, an agricultural park on county land. More specifically, we are looking at Harvey Bear as a potential site, but as I said, there's a number of ongoing conversations that need to happen to explore that more fully. So we're asking if parks could be an appropriate and effective location for an ag park and incubator. We're imagining this as a Marshall Cottle Park for South County. If this were to be developed on county park land, we think that there's a number of opportunities to develop similar events and programming that have been very successful at Marshall Cottle and making that accessible in the South County. as well as relieving some of the restraints, such as access to labor, which has been a significant issue for the master farmer there. So really what we're looking at, if this were to be a collaboration with the county parks, is a joint focus both on developing small farm businesses as well as conducting agricultural education, historical preservation, as well as public engagement through those measures, as well as events on the site. So what might an ag incubator look like on county park land? We think that, again, looking to Marshall Cottle as a model, that having third-party management would be essential, and that soliciting at least one, if not two, managers, third-party, as well as county parks and their appetite for being involved in education and the management as well. What has been clear is that part of the success at Marshall Cottle is that there are a strong number of partners that help to manage that location, and we think that any further development of an ag incubator would rely on that as well. So in our preliminary planning efforts, again, kind of using Harvey Bear as a thought experiment, but we think also applicable to other sites, we've begun looking at what the need is for beginning farmers and what kind of plots they are looking for coming out of a number of the training programs, those who are actively looking for purchasing or leasing land and what's appropriate for them, as well as the more intermediate farmers that we would want to attract, what would be appropriate for them. So if we take an estimated total acreage of 100 acres, we're imagining that it would be split probably between 40-60, 50-50, roughly half of that, 40 to 60 acres, being the home of an anchor farm on that site, and that the incubator plots would also be between 40 and 60, consisting of about 5 to 15 acres apiece. Now, the other important distinction, aside from the degree of expertise and development in their own agricultural career, between the incubator plots as well as the anchor farm plot, is that the anchor farm plot would be a much longer tenure. We'd imagine at least a 10-year lease for that farmer to develop the site to their needs. The incubator plots, I think there are a number of models that we could replicate, but the idea is for it to be flexible, that it could be on a year-to-year basis or much or on a shorter term, such as 2 or 3 years. So we've also begun looking at what some of the costs are involved. Again, taking the acquisition of land out of the picture, the costs drop significantly from what a complete package would look like. So if we're talking about bare land that is suitable to agriculture without much improvement, but that the site is requiring improvement, including reliable access to water, these are some of the preliminary numbers that we've done in soliciting bids from well drilling to farm stand and farm center construction, as well as some of the basic site preparation needs. So from our estimates, we think that having the sufficient water infrastructure to support 100 acres, as well as the water infrastructure needed to be modular to adapt to a number of farmers, not just one operation, that $1 million to $1.5 million would be required, and that would include an on-site grid-tied solar array. Similarly, we think important to this being on parks land in particular is to create educational space, public engagement space, places for events, as well as a farm stand as we have at Marshall Cottle. And so we've done some preliminary bids on what it would cost to construct that. And the total estimate that we have would be between $2 and $2.5 million. So the next steps, again, it's really important to emphasize that this exploration is a joint effort with parks, and it's going to be really important for them to conduct legal analysis of the use of Harvey Bear or any other existing park land within the context of the Park Charter Fund. Similarly, we, and by we I mean planning department, needs to prepare a more fleshed out concept for them to use in vetting with County Council in compliance with the Park Charter Fund and the park purpose that it would serve. We'll be taking the lead. We have taken the lead in conducting the feasibility study, looking at estimates, kind of doing a market assessment, if you will, about the needs that are out there. And we will be presenting a more formal proposal on a staff level to county parks, after which we can imagine going to the Parks Commission or to Hewlett or to an Ag Advisory Commission, should that be formed. And lastly, it's important to note that something that Parks is also interested in, should it not work to use existing park land, is a joint acquisition of land. And we can imagine, this is something that we discussed very briefly before, we can imagine that if there's a property that has been identified for an agricultural conservation easement, that purchasing fee simple of that property could make sense in partnership with Parks in order to develop an agricultural park and incubator on that site. So should it not be feasible to develop an existing park such as Harvey Bear, that is another option that we will explore. And lastly, I want to reiterate that the distinction between Marshall Cottle and other existing park properties is that there's a deed restriction at Marshall Cottle explicitly calling for agricultural legacy education and preservation. So with that, I want to introduce a guest that we've invited here. Javier Zamora has come up from Monterey County. He is the owner of JSM Organics, and he has gone through ALBA, which is the Agricultural and Land-Based Training Association, and they are a more hands-on incubator, if you will, where they give access to land, but also a number of training opportunities. And in looking at the regional need for an ag incubator, they're really the stepping stone that we would be providing access to land for. So you can imagine that graduates from a program such as ALBA, in addition to a number of others, would be the prime candidates to be hosted on a site such as this. Javier graduated from the ALBA program in 2012. I think he began with 2 acres and acre and a half, and he's now managing 120 acres on a property that he owns. And he's also serving as his own form of ag incubator. So 20 of those acres he is subleasing to farmers that have graduated out of that program, and he's providing a stepping stone for them. He has 30 employees, and he's also on the board of ALBA. He serves on the USDA Small Farmers and Ranchers Advisory Committee, as well as the Pajaro Valley Water Agency. And in much of staff's deliberation on who is going to farm the properties that are protected under conservation easements, who are the folks who are going to take over management of the lands that we're protecting in Santa Clara Valley. The work of ALBA and the work of folks like Javier has been very inspiring. And so we wanted to invite him, since there are not a lot of folks in our county from the community, particularly of immigrant farm workers that are transitioning to farm owners. And since he's been such an inspiration to this project, I was hoping that we could give him a couple minutes to speak to that.
Such a short notice, but farmers were always ready to go. Gracias. Thanks for inviting me, Michael. And my name is Javier Zamora, and I'm a really blessed individual to be here in front of you. And I'll tell you that ALBA has been nothing but a blessing to me, because it allowed me to find the resources that I needed to make my passion of growing food an actual business. In 2011, I went through the program, finished in 2012. At the same time, I was going through Cabrillo College. I went to college when I was 43 years old, so you know. I needed a little bit of science behind my hands-on and farming experience that I had. So the ALBA program, what it allowed me to do is understand resources such as someone that could lend you a little bit of money like FarmLink, a certifier like CCOF, some of the programs like the USDA or the FSA that allows you to protect our land and our environment and help you extend your seasons with certain programs that they have. They don't give you anything for free, nor do I want anything or any farmer nothing for free, but you want a resource that you can make this happen. So in 2012, I started my farm with 1.5 acres. Just myself and my kids and my wife who come from Tracy to help me out. In 2013, oh, by the way, out of that, I grossed $47,000, just my Schedule F. The next year, I grew to 3.5 acres on $170,000. The third year, I went up to 24 acres, actually. And I started hiring more people. To make a long story short, 2 years ago, I was able to purchase a ranch that is a 200-acre ranch. It has 120 acres of conservation easement that the Elkhorn Slough Foundation paid a couple of $1 million for me to make me own it, and has 80 acres of farmable land. I still lease about 50 acres outside this ranch. I now employ 30 people. This year, I think we're probably getting really close to break the $2 million in sales. I have my own label. I grow mostly strawberries. All the legalities, all your food safety, all your liability insurance, your workers' compensation insurance, your $3 million just in case somebody gets sick. Otherwise, the retail stores won't buy them. Mostly strawberries, but then caneberries like raspberries, blackberries, lots of vegetables and organic flowers, all certified organic. I believe that the need of having an incubator in that specific area, that Gilroy, Morgan Hill, it's needed because there are several farmers that I know go to farmers market and they have their plots nearby. In Monterey County, obviously we have Alba, and that has been a blessing to me. And it's also has allowed me to help others. When I first started my farm, I had come out of a housing crisis, and I had absolutely no credit, and nobody really wanted to talk to me at all. It was really super hard, incredibly hard to make a business. So now that I've been able to achieve and can pay my bills and do something that is really beautiful, that the most important thing that I do is feed not only my family and my community, but thousands of people within the Bay, the South Bay, even as far as Grass Valley we go. I see some farmers that are looking for pieces of land, and they are eager to start their own business. This is not just, so you know, it's not just Jose and Miguel and Juan. It's actually Christina, a realtor that wanted a farm. She's 62 years old. She has 1.5 acres out of my farm. It's Jose Flores that has 5 acres out of my 80 acres. He was my employee. He started with 1 acre, and then he went up to 5 acres last year with his kids. He's doing really well. Rafael and Erwin, they work for me. They now farm over 40 acres themselves, and they have about 15 employees. It's also Emily. She goes to Cabrillo. She's actually, she was just given an award with CCOF. She does all my farmers markets. And we also have Abel. He's married to a lady from England. They have beautiful kids, and he has 3 acres. And then we have another employee that worked for me, Juan Hernandez. He has 3 acres. So these are people that are looking for pieces of land. They don't need 20 acres. They don't need 10 acres. They only need 1 acre or 2, sometimes 3 to 5, to make a business of their own. In these communities, when you are a diversified farmer, you don't have to have 100 or 500 acres. You can have a 5-acre farm and don't have to work for anybody else that can make a really good living, because you can sell things that are organic or biodynamic, whatever it could be, and sell them to the right customer. My customers are retail stores, not the big chain, not the Whole Foods, not the Safeway, but someone like New Seasons in Evergreen, someone like New Seasons in Sunnyvale, or New Leaf in Santa Cruz, or Buy Right in the city, or the Co-op in Sacramento, and a few farmers markets where people understand what the real cost of food is. Also, something that I really proud of is to host not only the Harnell College students twice a year, but the Cabrillo College students come to my farm and see what an organic business does. Also, UC Davis graduates, Berkeley, they all look for my farms because it's very diversified and they do all kinds of research. And I am a really blessed individual because a lot of people look at me as someone that can make something happen. And it has happened because I work really hard and I'm really lucky, and we have lots of resources available. But we have to understand, and I always know that me by myself, I wouldn't be able to do it. I need somebody else to help me. If I just wanted to have my farm, I could just farm around my house, my 6,000 square foot. If I want to really make an impact, I need workers. And those workers have to be treated properly. They have to make sure, you have to make sure that they earn a good wage. I'm really proud to say that none of my workers make the $10, $50, $11 that most people pay, because I sell my strawberries directly to retail stores where they understand what almost the real price is. My workers make from $13 to $20 an hour, which is almost unheard of in the farming community. And any of you, Michael has gone to my farm, and if anyone wishes to see my books, they're open. That's what we need. We need people and communities to participate and be inclusive, not to be divisive and really wanted to have just your name because you're doing something unique. What we need to make sure that we leave something for the future. These days, our kids, they don't want to farm. Mine, I'm really blessed. I have 2 daughters, and one of them is really into it. She's 21. But a lot of kids that come from this area, all they want is the newest iPhone. And all they want is drive their Tesla. My God, I don't think any of us will take that when we go. So we have to make sure that we give them an opportunity and show them that having a diversified farm not only does it make you happy and make a big impact in the community, but it actually makes really good money too. So I'm really proud of doing that. And I'm sorry for taking so much time, but if you have any questions, please relate it to my farming. That's what I do, and I really, really enjoy it. And really thank you for inviting me here to share some of my story. And my little business is called JSM Organics. I only do Instagram, that's it, because my daughter set that up for me. And that's very easy for me. Anyway.
Thanks.
Gracias. Muchas gracias. Igualmente. ¿Todo bien? Gracias.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate it.
And I will leave these strawberries if you guys want to share them. So also because strawberries are slowing down right now, so we do different things to make sure that the cash flow continues coming in, and we can continue hiring and keeping our employees for longer, not just the season when we have a lot of strawberries.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Supervisor Wasserman the rest of the way. So we're truly co-chairing this evening. I know we're asked, as I said earlier, to receive the report on this item, but I'll turn it over to Supervisor Wasserman and see if there's further discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Supervisor Cortese. Just to conclude item number 6, I don't see any lights on. Anybody wishing to speak or ask questions on this item? I appreciate staff pointing out the deed restriction on Marshall Cottle Park that sets it aside from the other parks that were acquired with Park Charter Fund. Dr. Smith.
No, go ahead, finish your statement.
I will turn to you to give the expert opinion on that.
Well, I would just caution the committee and planning staff to not focus too much on parklands because the first step would be to get a legal opinion from county council regarding the compatibility of such a usage with park charter funds. I think the supervisor was about ready to point out that Marshall Cottle is an extreme exception to the rule. Using park land for this purpose, I'm pretty confident would not be allowed by the park charter. And using park charter funds to purchase land outright would not be likely to be legal. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give a definitive answer, but
Correct.
I think if you focus on parkland, you're going down a rabbit hole that's going to be unlikely to be successful. If you rather focus on trying to accomplish a way to develop a demonstration project or a incubator project, I should say, that would be a better focus.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification, and there's a lot of nuances in each of our businesses, and it was important that be raised. Supervisor?
I'm just wondering, since this is a report that we're receiving, and obviously there's continued work that needs to be fleshed out, and planning's, trying to work through the parks issues, and I'm sure the legal issues. It just seems like the natural landing place for this is to come back, given the wind down of the task force appropriately, to the Hewlett Committee, which you and I serve on, which
For a report back, you're saying?
yeah, for
Sure.
report back or report backs, plural, reports back, is that how you say that? Given that also that committee convenes housing, land use, environment, transportation, including parks. We have parks and planning on the dais for those committee meetings on a regular basis. So just to keep the ball up in the air, maybe that's the appropriate direction to give on this. Other than, of course, receiving the report.
Sure. So I think what you were hearing, if it's okay with the committee, is when parks and county council and planning come to a conclusion, that they report back at Hewlett, which is a public meeting, so you're all aware of what the conclusion was. All right?
We'd be more than willing to do that.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 7, which is the Santa Clara Valley Regional Brand Identity and Signage Campaign. Michael, is that you? Oops, your microphone. There you go.
Sorry, what's the shortcut they use? No, it's you're in there. This is your. All right, thank you. So this is another one that we're bringing back to you to give an update, as well as some preliminary cost estimates for implementation. So also in September, we presented initial ideas around having a regional brand and specifically a signage campaign. So this is very much within the Ag Valley plan towards building branding, education, and awareness. The idea here is to develop a sense of place as well as a brand that is adaptable to a variety of uses. This will look familiar from the Ag Plan itself, and the themes have been developed out for adaptation into a signage program as well as a number of other campaign materials. So the concept is to be able to build off of the projects and endeavors and businesses within the valley itself. You can imagine that we can have a welcome sign, but that similarly this brand would be used by individual farmers for packaging labels or for educational materials. So we wanted this to be compatible with the other brands in the area, and our consultants spoke with a number of people, and including farmers like Spade and Plow, as well as folks working on the Gilroy Garlic Festival. And for this reason, the consultants did not recommend developing a logo, if you will, but really just sticking with the name and creating a sense of place through that name. So the first phase that we're recommending is implementation of signage throughout the valley. So this map, if you can make it out, is the agricultural resource area, and the red strips there represent agricultural corridors that are also traveled heavily by vehicles. We're looking primarily on the east at Foothill and New Ave, and then on the west we're looking at Santa Teresa Boulevard and Hale, as well as Monterey Road. And these corridors are where we're thinking about putting a number of these smaller scale signs. And the red circles that you see are really the entry points. So as I'll show some of the signs to you, there's kind of two classes. One is sort of a gateway sign, if you will, entering the valley, saying welcome to those entering. And you can see at the very north tip here is a spot on Santa Teresa. I'll show you a mock-up of that later. To the south, there are a couple on 101 and where Bloomfield intersects as well as 25 intersects. There's another location that we think is ideal on Pacheco Pass, and another entering the wine region to the west. So the most basic sign type that we've been looking at in response to a lot of feedback from farmers that are interested in participating is representing what crops are grown there. So these are projected to be a voluntary measure that would be on private property and that would be done in collaboration, and that in this first phase of development, what we're recommending is to sort of pilot it with a number of these signs that we would work with farmers to locate on their property.
And clearly we have to add garlic and peppers.
Yeah.
Mushrooms too.
Another sign type for these kind of ancillary corridors and farm roads are the Mind the Ag or Farmers at Work signs. And these we're imagining as a companion to a road sign that is more common, that is stock, which is a tractor or farmer crossing, if you will. And we think that having some combination of a phrase like Mind the Ag or Farmers at Work would raise awareness and complement something like the Right to Farm Act to generally build an understanding that there is working agriculture in those areas. Another sign type is really just a placemaking sign. This also we're imagining would be a voluntary measure on private property owners who are interested. In our preliminary estimates, we are looking to do just a handful of these, and again, the county would be paying for it, but we would be collaborating with a farmer and landowner to implement. You can imagine that these could be combined with the crops to not only say what's growing there, but where it is that you are, that these items are being grown. There are a couple of different mock-ups that are in your packet, for example, doing a wood treatment as is seen here, or more of a see-through sign so it looks a little bit, so you see more of the landscape behind it. And then there's the marquee sign presentation. So these are the circles on the map where we're imagining key entry points. And fundamentally different from the other signs, these would require a great deal of engineering, lighting, and they would be permanent fixtures within the landscape. We're imagining, due to the effort and the cost, that one or two of these would be most appropriate, two being our recommendation to have an entry point from the north and an entry point from the south to the valley, announcing that you're there. You can imagine if you've driven up, I I forget which road you're on, but when you're entering Napa Valley, you'll see a similar sign to this announcing your entry to the agricultural valley. This is on going south on Santa Teresa Boulevard, just north of Bailey Ave. This is to the south, driving north on 101, and this is another treatment that the consultants have developed that would also be a kind of marquee gateway sign. Again, that would be a permanent fixture as opposed to the more voluntary farmer collaborations or the road signs in the case of the Farmers at Work. These are really expensive, and we can talk about some of the estimates and what that includes. But we've looked also at some other options, including smaller versions that are much more cost effective, but get to the same point. Similarly, we've taken a look at working with agricultural infrastructure, whether it's Clear Channel, which owns these silos when you're driving north. I believe this is right where 25 intersects 101 as you're driving north, which is owned by Clear Channel and is advertised by Martinelli's. Our design consultants did a mock-up of this. You can imagine that this could work in conjunction with some of the produce labels. So as you enter the valley, you see these iconic silos branded with the area that you're entering, as well as some of the crops that are growing there. And then as you're driving along the side roads, you see some of those crops on individual farmers' fields, denoting what is going on there. Similarly, we could imagine a more cost-effective but equally large endeavor when you're entering the valley in working with property owners that are not available through Clear Channel, but that might be willing to host signs on their property as well. And this could be large scale, as seen here, or it could be a simple vinyl sign applied to the signs of farmers' stands. So in the recommendation, we're proposing really these 4 types. I believe 2 of the major gateway signs, again, one from the north and one from the south, a handful, maybe 3 of the secondary signs, 10 of the crop signs, and a handful of the regulatory or farmer crossing signs as well. Our motivation is really to pilot this. There's a lot of funding for these sorts of programs out there, but we think that it's important, particularly if we're leading towards a 2020 ballot measure, to get something in the ground in 2019. And so we are proposing that the county fund a phase 1 implementation of this signage as soon as possible. The other aspect of this, we hope that the campaign includes the development of a number of other materials, not least of which is a website that would be linked. You'll see in some of these, there's a SantaClaraValley.ag, for example, that could be a website hosting a number of materials related to the ag plan. And so part of this implementation of the campaign also includes developing that website and these other supportive materials. So in the ag plan, we had a number of farmer stories, which solicited a lot of positive feedback and puts a personal face to the agriculture in this valley. We think that developing more of these stories with the farmers in our valley, as well as creating a platform to host those on the internet, so that you can imagine if someone sees a sign and they use their phone and they go home, or they go home and they access SantaClaraValley.ag or whatever the URL is, that they could find more of these stories there. Similarly, whether it's a physical brochure or whether it's hosted online, we think that a map that either shows folks where they could go visit farm stands or go to farm events, or just denoting where the preservation efforts are happening or where the wildlife corridor is, that we could develop a descriptive map in support of the many efforts under the ag plan. And then lastly, a number of farmers have, particularly the smaller farmers, have said that it would be a great boon to them to be able to market their proximity to their customers. So if you're growing in Santa Clara Valley and you're selling to folks in Santa Clara County or nearby, to be able to demonstrate the proximity of the produce through produce stickers or labels and carrying the brand that folks are also seeing while they're driving on the roads, we think there are a number of benefits there as well. So as an overview, the cost estimate for these very large permanent signs is $250,000, which is a lot of money. And I should emphasize that these are all-inclusive start-to-finish estimates that were gathered from calling a number of contractors, and should any funding be allocated for a signage program, we would go through a competitive bid process and ensure that we make the most use of those funds. But given our preliminary outreach by our consultants to sign fabricators and getting a complete sense of what would be required, these are our estimates, and as well as the numbers that we think would create a robust pilot program. Similarly, in order to develop a suite of materials that would be supportive of that, again, building off of the signage program, but also building off of the efforts that are happening through an Ag Advisory Commission, through an ACE program, through all of the ongoing efforts to implement the Ag Plan, we imagine that it would be useful to have a supportive campaign in addition to the signage as well. So once again, we really think that the return on investment, if you will, in prioritizing a signage and branding campaign today is that any measure that we take to the ballot in 2020 will be socialized to the residents of Santa Clara County, and that if folks are familiar with the persons, the farmers themselves, the crops, and the landscape, that they are going to be more inclined to support it when they're at the polls. And that, I think, is really the motivation for this campaign and for the urgency in particular behind it.
Michael, thank you for that. Committee members, we have possible action A is to receive a report. We don't need a motion for that. So unless there's objection, we'll consider the report received. We'll move on to the next item, which is a recommendation from staff to forward this to the Board of Supervisors. I'll make an opening comment. I think this would be very premature to forward to the Board of Supervisors at this time. I went through your PowerPoint, or the PowerPoint presentation, Michael, from the consultants, and I looked at some and I saw different vegetables, and I saw white writing and dark writing and background. I think there's a lot of decisions still to be made. There's a lot to still be presented. And I think since we just formed an Agricultural Advisory Commission, that this would be a wonderful first item to go to the Ag Commission for those people that are appointed, rather than us in the next hour or so to forward this on to the Board of Supervisors for the board to approve a program. This would be a great item to go to that Ag Advisory Commission that we're going to be forming very soon and have them discuss it and look at plans and bring forth a recommendation. Supervisor Cortese, I don't know if at that point the commission then would bring their recommendations forward to Hewlett, or if that would go straight from the commission to the board. But the motion before, the suggested action here is to forward the $703,000 financing request to the Board of Supervisors for approval. And thank you for saying repeatedly those two signs at $250,000 each. And thank you for getting bids and estimates and all the rest. But I look at those signs and I see $250,000 for each sign, and I go, boy, I see heads shaking in behind you as well and saying we got to do some more shopping on that. But I think there's still more design to be done. There's still more thinking to be done as far as colors and what the message is. There's a couple, three different options on various signs with your lands at work, welcome to Santa Clara Valley, et cetera. And I think it's going to be a great public discussion to be held and input to be received from what the Farm Bureau wants to see, what the Chamber of Commerce wants to see, what the individuals on the new Ag Commission want to see. So that would be my recommendation. Laurel.
Well, I have to admit that I do agree with the $250,000 gateway signs. That's each, yeah. So that is a little concerning. But I think the smaller signs, and I agree with the supervisor, there are many other decisions. So I think, in my conscience, I could not recommend $700,000 towards this effort. I could certainly do something less than that. And then my own little pet peeve is that Santa Clara Valley is the entire county, so it really only makes sense to have a gateway sign if you're coming up from the south to the north, because then you are truly entering the entire valley. It doesn't make any sense to put "Welcome to Santa Clara Valley" when you're in the middle of Coyote Valley and all you're doing really is going into South County. And I would hope that the ag plan, while a lot of the productive land is in District 1, you know, I would hope that this plan would actually inspire agricultural preservation throughout the county in many different forms. So I would just caution about that, and I'm fine with a recommendation of referring it to a new Ag Commission if that's the pleasure of the task force. Thank you.
Supervisor.
Yeah, well, Laurel kind of stole my thunder on the gateway part of it. I think gateway signage is a good idea, and I think if it's there for a long time, the cost itself doesn't scare me away, because you amortize that out over the signs being there for 15 or 20 years. It's really, it could be a very good branding investment. I certainly wouldn't want to spend that much money every year relocating signs or rebuilding something or something like that. But I do think, I mean, just as somebody, as one of the many of us up here who've been around here for a long time, and you know, I certainly have agricultural roots where I still call this valley the Valley of Heart's Delight, oftentimes, even though it's not really that, you know, from Palo Alto to Milpitas to Gilroy and so forth anymore. I mean, obviously the tech sector has, and housing and all kinds of things have gobbled up a lot of what we used to call the Valley of Heart's Delight. The fact of the matter is, I think what Laurel said is absolutely true. I do think some minor tweaks could, you know, change things quite a bit. I mean, if you weren't saying welcome to, and you had a sign in the middle of Coyote Valley that says Santa Clara Valley, your land's at work, fine. I mean, just eliminate those words. At the gate, at the actual gateway, you would still say welcome, like she was saying. So there's a little more thought has to be given to that. And I also think that, and I mentioned this actually anticipating this item when I saw the agenda item to Rob, and I think Laurel was alluding to this. I'm not sure that when you're coming down, you know, the 280 corridor, you know, crossing into the county line, that it makes any less sense to have a gateway sign, you know, indicating that you're coming into Santa Clara Valley, whatever we stand for. With that, Supervisor Wasserman, I like your recommendation. I don't want to cut, you know, I know there's others that may want to speak to this, and I do think the steps, the hopscotch to go to back and forth between the Ag Commission and Hewlett before going to the Board of Supervisors, because I think our colleagues would like it as refined as possible before it got to them. But one other thing I'd like to add is that the county's, as Dr. Smith is leading and well aware, you know, very involved in broad-based branding kind of activities, trying to figure out as we speak, you know, how to better identify the county to consumers of all kinds, as you know, as a place of resources, you know, whether that is agriculture or any of the number of things that the multiplicity of agencies here deliver. And so I think that this work needs to be cross-connected with our overall branding work, and is not to water it down or take anything away from the ag emphasis. I get it completely that at some point this area with these boundaries around it needs to be highlighted as we go down this path of preserving agriculture, but it doesn't hurt to toggle this also back and forth with the branding effort that's going on. I mean, what we get criticized for is VMC appears to have one brand, Ag Preservation has one brand, Social Services has a brand, you know, you can go on and on and on. And this would really be a great opportunity to start reversing that trend and say, let's make sure whatever we do here is at least aligned with where the county is going generally, even if that means there's a little county logo in the far right corner of the sign or something like that speaks to Santa Clara Valley is part of the county of Santa Clara. But I'll leave how that looks or how that's done to people who are expert at that sort of thing. I just think it needs to be part of the discussion.
Understood. Julie.
Thank you. So a few things. First of all, thank you to staff. For me, this is really exciting, the prospect of this. I think there's a lot of potential here. I very much appreciate what Chair Wasserman and what Laurel have said, as well as Chair Cortese. But I just wanted to point out a few things that are the positives. I really thought the crop signs were good. I think the important thing here is about telling a story, and it's about making that human connection. So moving forward, whoever gets this, whether it's the Agricultural Commission, which I agree would be a really good place to start for input, I think that we need to keep that in mind, that personal connection. The idea of mind the ag does not sway me. Farmers at Work definitely means more to me. So I think we need to really be thinking about how do we get folks to make that connection and care and slow down their cars and be mindful of the lands at work. The idea of your lands at work, while I know that sort of in my community or in that of the Open Space Authority, the use of working lands is something that we are using all the time. But that's sort of our little closed community that I think uses that land. So if we're going to use that kind of terminology anywhere, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of wordsmithing a little bit here, I really think we need to be thinking about how are we going to make that connection to that ballot measure? Because I think it's more like farming starts here. Farming's happening here. People don't need to make the distinction so much between farming and ranching. They just need to make the connection that it's happening and it matters and it's important to them and they need to support it. Regulatory signs, like I said, were great. In terms of the gateway signs, I'll leave that alone in terms of the larger branding and the greater discussion that will happen around it. But I think there is opportunity, at least coming into the agricultural resource area, to brand that as an agricultural resource area. Your lands at work, sometimes maybe people might associate with the fact that, oh, is there a warehouse going up here? Is there going to be an office complex going up here? But if they know they're driving into an agricultural resource area, I think that's a lot, that just says it. It really just has to be, to me, very straightforward and something that people they read it once, they get it, and they start respecting it and understanding it. So I'm sorry if I've sort of gone on a little bit about this, but I don't know if I'm going to be part of that discussion, maybe yes or no, at attending the meeting for the Agricultural Commission or not, but I just wanted to get those thoughts out right now. Thank you.
I haven't heard an accent like that since my in-laws from Canada. That was great. That was absolutely great. Aaron.
If I could just take a second and say, I really appreciate the branding, what's happened here at the county and stuff like that, and I appreciate Supervisor Wasserman's comments regarding specific and general taxes. One of the things that I've learned during this whole process of ag preservation and being in agriculture for the short time I've been in as a second generation person is that it's gonna be a big haul, and there's gonna be a lot that's gonna be needed to go ahead and save agriculture in Santa Clara County because of the forces against it. And some of those forces are dollars driven. And one of the things that I see in terms of talking about parcel taxes and all the revenue sources that are available in terms of trying to make this happen is that monies are scarce in terms of trying to overcome the forces of housing and industry, technology, and so forth. And I think that what it brings me back down to is what Commissioner Joe Davini did a while back in terms of drawing attention to the ecosystem benefits of agriculture and open lands and working lands. And I think that's something that Open Space Authority is trying to go ahead and work with as well, bring this to the light of the community, because the community is going to have to go ahead and fund this. This will not just happen on a spur of the fund balances from the Santa Clara County to make this happen. The seed money is very important to make this thing move forward, but I believe that 2020 coming through and saying, okay, community, do you want to save agriculture is the question of the day. And that's the one that has to be answered by the community and the taxpayers in the community here in Santa Clara County. So I really think that you know, in my viewpoint, understanding what agriculture is to the community is super important, and branding makes a huge play towards that. So I would say that, you know, those monies might look large right now, but in the overall scheme of things, in terms of if we're trying to save agriculture and preserve what is left in this county in terms of what can be open lands or working lands and not pave them over, then that might be a low-cost investment to make that happen. So I know that the hurdle is big, and I appreciate everything that's being done between Supervisor Cortese and Wasserman and everybody in this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we going by veto? I see the sign.
Yeah, I'd like to just say a couple things. But
All righty.
that's 2 Teslas, by the way.
2 Teslas.
Mike, you could be driving around in a Tesla. What are you doing wasting signs? But the real thing is, twice we've referred to the Agricultural Commission that's going to be formed. And I'd like to, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the duties of that commission. And more importantly, when it comes to going forward with anything that this task force is coming up with, I'd like to see that commission formed so they can look at all these different areas from an agricultural standpoint. I think it's important, especially like mapping. If Rob, you're going to be laying out maps for where the agricultural areas are going to be. I think this commission could be very, very important in a lot of these different aspects of the things that we've talked about. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, are you sharing? You got the light?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Just, two quick comments on signage. The crop signs are, going to be all the signage is going to be high visibility, and I would just be hopeful that there's some consideration to graffiti management that might occur, particularly because they're on private property, and it might be quite an expectation for the grower to maintain those signs graffiti-free.
Not in South County.
Trust me, it's everywhere. I deal with it a mile away from a public road, out in the middle of nowhere that I have to hike to, and it's a corner post, and it's a tagging target. It's incredible. The other thought is on your crop signs. I think the report said they had a life of 2 to 4 years, and that's easy to manage on a permanent crop, but on row crops where there's crop rotations that occur very frequently, I don't know how you quite manage those, because we do want to satisfy the public interest that's there, and there would be nothing more disappointing than to have a sign that says sweet corn and there's some other crop in there. So, thank you.
All right, and one more. Yes, sir, Mr. Gala.
What worries me about that, putting those bell peppers up, I'm sorry, you missed bell peppers, but tomatoes and stuff.
I said peppers.
People are going to pull over and thinking, oh, this is a nice garden. I
Yes.
can take tomatoes.
Yes, they are. They will pull over and take, that will happen.
All right.
I'll, seeing no more insightful information to pass on, I saw staff taking notes. I'll make the recommendation that the idea about the regional brand identity and signage campaign be put onto the agenda for the first meeting of our newly formed Ag Advisory Commission. Look for a second. Second. Supervisor Cortese, your light on? Oh, no, I thought you just turned it on just now. Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. That passes unanimously. We now move on to item number 8, which is consider recommendations from the department. Do we have any speaker cards? I saw Doug. Doug, were you speaking on any items? So, Peggy, we don't have any speaker cards for any items. I haven't missed anybody? Great. Consider recommendations from the Department of Plan and Development relating to final summary of Agricultural Preservation Task Force actions.
Yes, Rob Easter again. So this is it. This is the end. That hopefully is the beginning. So I do have a summary. We did want to put a bow on this, and in a minute I'll actually have something that has a bow on it to hand out. But I did want to summarize for the task force the good work you've done over the last 7 months. Make sure we're all on the same page on the items that you've looked at, recommended, and try and provide a broad summary on where we go from here. So as you know, this is your last meeting. You're an ad hoc, you're an interim task force that terms out after this. And the big question, of course, is what are the next steps? So I did want to provide an overview of the programs that are going forward, what you looked at, budget, some of that's going to adjust based on the discussion we just had on the signage, what staff had envisioned for implementation, knowing that your good work and recommendations, we'll run with that, and hopefully how it'll materialize. And then I actually had one or two good updates we got from the state on some programs we're working on. So that's the summary to date. It came out to an even number. You've looked at 10 items in general, starting back. You started back in April and are ending in November. I'm not going to go into these in detail. We can go back through them, but just to summarize, some of the items you looked at were ag worker housing permit streamlining. That was back in May. 2 items in August. You'll remember the RE grant program to help with investments with farmers and infrastructure related to climate change and climate resilience. Farmland Security Zone was also reviewed back in August. The Ag Ombuds program, helping our farmers with the regulatory process back in September. 2 in October, looking at the right to farm notifications, improving the outreach on those. And we talked about a comprehensive zoning package to help farming and to prevent conversion of farmland. Of course, tonight, you've looked at the signage and branding program and recommended it go forward. The big item that's at the center of this that we think is key to all of this, of course, is the regional ACE purchasing program, which has both short-term and long-term components, the Ag Advisory Commission, and then last but not least, we will continue to look at options on the Ag Incubator. Budget, again, this will adjust a little bit based on where the signage goes, but just to summarize all these recommendations, a lot of them that you pushed forward were actually ordinance recommendations. Those will be absorbed into the department's budget, and again, those are changes to regulations or ordinances that we hope to make a difference. A few of them actually do require budget items, so just to summarize, the RE grant program, you'll remember, is about $200,000. That's a one-time grant program to sort of pilot that. The Ag Ombuds Person program is something we'd like to have ongoing, and that'll be an external service provider. Our estimate is about $120,000. Signage and branding, I guess we'll look at that a bit more closely, but that estimate was about $700,000. And then, of course, the largest item was the purchasing of the conservation easements. So collectively, the smaller programs up to around $1 million, but the big program, that's the centerpiece of this, was ideally $20 million a year for ACE purchasing. Timeline going forward, 2 of the items you've looked at are actually in process. The Farmland Security Zone went to the board in October, and staff's working to finalize that ordinance and bring it back for adoption. And staff is continuing to work on the ag worker streamlining ordinance. It went to our Planning Commission last month, and we hope to have it before the Planning Commission board at the start of next year. We do intend to take the bulk of the rest of the recommendations to the board in January, either the first or second meeting. And again, that would be a few of the items you've already looked at and some of the items you had tonight. That includes the RE grant program, the Ag Ombuds program. We'll pause on the signage and branding program, but the creation of the Ag Advisory Commission and the request for the year-end fund balance. We'd like to put that together as a package before the board, sort of as a cumulative total of a lot of the work still to be done. In terms of going forward, we're going to be very busy in 2019. So we're kind of parsing the year out into a couple segments. Some of the short-term items we're looking to get done in spring would be adoption of the streamlining for ag worker housing, adoption of the Farmland Security Zone, adopting the right to farm ordinance, and creating the Ag Advisory Commission, which will be key to advising a lot of these actions, hopefully in mid-spring at the latest. By summer, we'd like to get the RE grant program up and running and sort of help farmers with some of their improvements, get the Ag Ombuds program up and running. Hopefully we'll have the signage program starting to come back at that point. And again, if the year-end fund balance resolution is adopted, that funding, if available, would materialize at the end of this budget cycle, which would be around June of next year. Finally, work throughout next year to try and have legislative change on the transfer tax. And again, that's key to us focusing on a ballot initiative in 2020. Okay, so this, I am going to admit, is pretty hokey, but it's a lot of words we put before you, but I always thought graphics were a little better. So I asked our tech folks to help out just to kind of show, hey, the work you've done, how would it ideally materialize for a farmer in the RE area, in the South County area? So, some of the work, these are policies, these are programs. But I think what we envision is on the ground, if you're farming in South County, how does this benefit you? So again, I apologize the hokiness, but it was sort of a way to show this graphically. So some of these items is to streamline farm worker housing. Again, what you have before you is sort of a farm in South County, and before the Ag Task Force, maybe not a lot of policies and tools that help that farmer, but if we allow farmers to have a much more streamlined permitting process, and again, that's a very fancy farm worker house, but they could put these up with much less regulations. We hope to get some sort of signage out so people know what's growing and where the Santa Clara Valley Ag region is at, and they recognize our farmers and they slow down and allow them to do what they're doing. Through the RE grant program, we're going to have some funding available for people to do water efficiency improvements and hedgerows and things that really help our farmers do capital investments to invest in farming. Again, if farmers are willing, we're willing to purchase those conservation easements. Not subtle there at all, the dollar signs, but that purchase is about 75% of the equity of farmers and keeps it in their ownership and allows them to sort of be made whole by any speculative value of the land. One of the tools we talked about is a zoning buffer, so at least you don't have the houses next door sort of encroaching on farmland, keep the houses off in the distance so the farmers can focus on what they're doing. And again, some of those permit streamlining was allow more farm-to-table events. So again, apologize for the hokiness, but was just going to try and materialize a lot of the policies and programs in terms of how you might see them happen going forward. Last but not least, we thought two really good updates. One's a semi-secret, but we didn't want to keep it under wraps. So next Tuesday, a few of us are going up to Sacramento. The Valley Ag Plan actually received the Governor's Environmental and Economic Leadership Award. It's a rare award. Michael had submitted an application. We were awarded, and next Tuesday we'll go up and receive that. The state's technically... the state's technically told us not to announce it publicly, so you have to keep it secret, and we don't know if this is being televised, but we couldn't resist the ability to showcase that. And then last but not least, not a small thing, we applied for a grant to put conservation easements on about 250 acres of land in San Martin, and today we received that grant, to our knowledge. So, yes. So this, not a small effort, $15 million. That's bigger than the operating budget of Los Altos Hills and Montessorino, sorry. But it's not a small amount of money that the state's willing to invest in our program. And we're very proud of that, and it's a great foundational effort to get the conservation easement program going.
And Rob, that's for 252 acres that have been identified in San Martin and
It is, yeah. It's identified actually in the One Bay Area Plan as the San Martin Ag Preserve, and it's been targeted as a high value area for conservation so far under our mapping. So, last but not least, wanted to start Christmas early, so I wanted to thank you for all of your efforts. I know it's not an easy thing, especially when there's a Warriors game on, or otherwise to hang out at 5:30 to 7:30 on a Tuesday or Thursday night. So we put something a little tiny together for all of you, and we're going to hand these out. So a little mug that has, it's our initial branding campaign, the Santa Clara Valley Ag Plan. If you have anything locally grown, you can put it inside. And then something from one of our farmers, Andy's Orchard. This is what we visited on the tour, some dried fruit from the Morgan Hill area. So we just wanted to thank you very much for all the good work, recommendations you've done. Hand these out. And again, thank you for all your great efforts.
Thank you and Michael and all the staff members that have been involved for making this happen. We had a starting date, an ending date. We had a list of objectives to accomplish. The open forum, the members, each of you that serves on here, and the 2 or 3 people that aren't here this evening. Thank you for all the time and the passion that you put in being away from your family, being away from your homes. And I think we've done a great job. I really do. Supervisor?
Yeah, similar feelings. And Rob, I want to thank you and your team, and Michael, and everyone else has been involved behind the scenes, not only for getting a lot of work done over a 7-month period, or 7 or 8 month period, but also being adaptable enough to bring people in from Long Island, New York, on fairly short notice, Sonoma, Monterey, to speak to us. And all of them, I think, compelling presentations. to create a tour for people that requested that here, and all of that is well-respected work and well-received work. And then to the task force members, this has really been one of the best groups that I've had the opportunity to work with in 25 years, just in terms of people making serious comments, asking serious questions, but staying the course, sticking to their knitting, and helping us to work through this process over 7 months without a lot of grief. And this, to me, that's kind of textbook civics. I mean, there's always a place for serious debate and deliberation, and we've done that, but there doesn't have to be acrimony, and there doesn't have to be stakes put in the ground to establish all the immovable places in politics. And really none of that happened here. So thank you for that, and thank you for your participation, your expertise, and thank you, Dr. Smith. We all are going to remember your commitment, not only to being here, but your commitment to making sure we have some real money to work with in this next budget cycle. I appreciate the fact that you were involved with the tour, and I think you came away with strong impressions about the need for this work to happen. And the Board of Supervisors can try to direct all that it wants in terms of competing resources, we need you to figure out how to make that happen to get us to the next big step, which I assume at some point will be the ballot. I know all of you are busy. Some of you are wearing 2 or 3 hats, like Laurel Pravetti. So thank you for the commitment again to be here. Thank you to my co-chair, Supervisor Wasserman, for starting meetings when I wasn't here on time, ending meetings when I wasn't here to help adjourn them, and pretty much running things all on the way. And to my staff, Vanessa Turner is here. I know Supervisor Wasserman's staff has been intimately involved with all of this. Vanessa's been staffing it all the way through from my office. And I know we even have, probably for not the first time, but a couple San Jose State political science students here representing. If you could wave your hands, people can see who you are. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Shout out to Yvonne from my office as well. And Laurel, you had comments?
I just also wanted to add my thanks first to the task force. I've learned so much from each of you. I really have enjoyed working with you and working with you on the subcommittee as well. So big thanks to all of you. A lot of thanks to staff. You've done a fabulous job guiding us through this. I would hope that what goes to the board is a little bit more than just a few pages. There were some nuanced comments that the staff did receive, and so I'm not sure how those are going to be packaged, or if the board will see those, or if as the individual items come up for Planning Commission or board approval, if that's when the nuance would come forward. But there was a lot of very thoughtful comments of the co-chairs as well as the task force members, so I would hope that the board would have a full flavor of all of the work that was done. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I don't get in trouble with County Council. Possible actions, item A was to receive a report. Again, we don't need a motion to do that, so we'll consider the report received. And B was to forward a final agricultural preservation task force summary. And I'm going to add in as adjusted recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, because there were some adjustments that we made, the staff made note of. And Julie, your light is on, and then I'll look for a second to the motion so we can conclude this item too.
Yeah, sorry to slip this in, but if the chairs and the task force and staff would indulge me, I'd really appreciate it if we could get together afterwards and take a picture, if you don't mind.
With our what do you call it, swag?
Yes, yeah.
Good. I made a motion to forward the final ag task force summary as adjusted to the board. I need a second.
I'll second it, and also at the same time, I'd like to thank our leadership and the staff leadership for keeping this herd of cats going in the right direction and constantly so. And I'd like to also say that I'd like to nominate that Julie get on the yearbook committee for, and thus second the motion.
There we go. All right, any other comments? Otherwise, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion passes unanimously. We handled item number 9 in consent, so unless there's any objection or any further comments, we will adjourn this meeting. Seeing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much and happy holidays.